You know, it's interesting when we start talking about the history of the M14 because a lot of times people try to recall things that they only ever heard off of a History Channel episode. When, at least in my estimation, as far as the service rifle, the M14, not your M1A, not the personal rifle that some guy built for you, but the M14 was probably one of the most useless piles of dog shit held together by hubris I or anyone has ever seen. The fact of the matter is this: a bunch of dudes that wanted to keep their jobs were so resistant to any sort of change and so resistant to any sort of cooperation that had people like this have actually been in charge, the very next war that we fought right after that would have gone exactly in the way that it went with the French when they encountered the Germans in the Second World War. A bunch of people prepared and ready to fight for the last war, they got rolled up in record time. Now, I don't look at this through the lens of someone that watched Black Hawk Down, where I get to see a dude with a desert camo rifle blasting skinnies out the side of a friggin' helicopter. What I see is a government entity intentionally killing our own guys just so that they don't lose their jobs to private companies. And so today we're going to cover the service history of the M14, why it came about, and why in fact it's so ass. So in terms of things up, the Ordnance Corps is just the undisputed heavyweight champion. These people are thoroughly responsible for some of the biggest and dumbest decisions that we had made in the realm of modern combat since the emergence of new technologies in the First World War. Their calling card is refusing to observe what we, the American military, is doing, what our enemies are doing, and what our allies are doing. Of that list of things is the following. In World War II and Korea, we figured out that massive open spaces that are held down by light and medium machine guns is just a thing that's not happening anymore. Mechanized warfare, air forces, and very accurate artillery, which is in stark contrast to World War I era not very accurate at all artillery, is totally in love with wide open spaces, which means if you're in opposition to this and probably starving, in other words communist, and you want to stand any chance at all, you gotta get in close if you plan at all to succeed. Small arms combat between these two different wars required guys to get in quite close, and in order to stop attacks dead or to deny entire pieces of geography, you had to outweigh your enemy with bullets. And of course, if you were on the attack, you needed to be able to move quickly, which is why a combination of a main infantry rifle like the M1 Garand, the BAR, the sub 5-pound M1 carbine, which was initially supposed to just be for rear echelon troops, the Thompson submachine gun, and far more common, the M3 grease gun, was such a common and popular amalgamation of small arms to take into a fight. Thing is though, is that logistically this super duper sucks. There's a lot of different firearms and calibers that you have to deal with, and aside of all of those different challenges, that's a lot of different manuals of arms as well. Never mind various magazine issues that you're gonna have to work out, manufacturing types, quality control issues that everyone has to deal with all at once, and so this creates an issue. It creates a huge issue because war needs to move fast and your logistics need to be top tier. So if you can produce the most shit, what happens if you can streamline the process? Well, that was certainly the thinking of the time, especially post-Korean War. NATO in and of itself decided it was going to get together and try and solve these logistics issues. One of the many would be a small arm. Now, having observed our enemies and then our new enemies, all of our allied nations have more or less come to the same conclusion. Taking a full-powered rifle cartridge and cutting it down to round about in half, or at the very least by a third, seems to be the ticket. After all, the MP44 really is just a 7.92 by 57mm, or their standard rifle cartridge at the time, cut down to 33, or in other words known as 7.92 by 33 Kurz. And the Soviets have been doing the same thing, essentially immediately after the war, cutting down 7.62 by 54R to 7.62 by 39, and now they're fielding it in rifles that have 30-shot magazines and select fire capability. More or less, the world knows that we're shifting in this direction. And it makes sense. Rifle ballistic effect on target with the controllability capability of a submachine gun. It's an infantryman's wet dream, especially if the gun is simple enough to keep running. But of course, having seen all of this, and having seen some of our friends across the ocean on a big ol' island that was cratered into the friggin' Stone Age in the 40s, when we saw them show off this brand new bullpup rifle that they're trying to toady out to NATO, saying, hey listen, we have a great round that's cut down from our 303 British. It's actually a .28 diameter bullet. The bullet itself is quite long. It's tapered severely, has a shitload of powder behind it, and it's real nasty when it hits stuff. Maybe you should check this out. The very first thing that American Ordnance Corps did at the time was look at it and promptly throw a tantrum. American Ordnance Corps at the time insisted that all of NATO should use a cut-down 30-06. This 7.62 by 51 NATO round, if you know how measurements work, is not all that cut down, and based off of modern loadings is essentially the same weight bullet with damn near the same amount of powder behind it. It's the same round, because of course these assholes are obsessed with tradition and hitting things at 1,000 yards, because people can totally do that with open sights. Because of course the legends that routinely say, yeah, some guy hit some guy at 1,000 yards with open sights in World War II or whatever is absolutely true, and we should 110% adhere to that like it is true. And of course, with the largest nation within NATO barking a bunch of bullshit about 7.62 by 51, the rest of the allied nations are willing to acquiesce, so long as we also adopt the FAL rifle. Listen, it's a nice rifle, it's got some new materials going into the handguard, finish is pretty nice, it's pretty corrosion resistant, you should check it out. And of course we said, yeah, sure, we'll go ahead and adopt this if you adopt our rifle round, to then proceed to turn around and immediately throw that idea in the trash, which of course makes tons of sense and isn't just a whole bunch of assholes that are trying to hang on to their jobs because private companies are encroaching on their territory. But with all the preamble laid out, we should probably go ahead and talk about why the M14 even is. So, look, what you gotta understand is Ordnance Corps gassery isn't a new concept at this point. These people within this department, that is a government entity at this point, so that would include Springfield Armory, not the one that you buy an XDM from, but the one that you look at as a government entity, is fairly used to things up and are quite inclined to things up at every given opportunity. So they want this thing officially adopted and entered into full-scale production by 1957, so they have some work to do here. So having already f***ed up a perfectly reasonable rifle, they took that lazy-eyed child that at this point is known as the M1 Garand, and they decided that, you know what, a 20-shot magazine will work out after all. Maybe it's not a waste of ammunition, and this is in no way us circling the drain and really wanting to keep our jobs. So we're gonna unbastardize the sword, pull the gas port back a little bit, add a flash suppressor that it was supposed to have in the first place, put a full auto switch in it, and there we go. We have the replacement for the M1, the BAR, the Thompson, the grease gun, and the M1 carbine all together now in a package that's just over 9 pounds. It's gonna go great. And after delivering the technical data package, which is absolutely massive, they expressly state that they are not going to be involved in the production of this rifle, to then turn around and proceed to make 150,000 rifles. But of course, this is just a fluke, you see. They're just trying to help the common man by making him put up with a bunch of bullshit, I guess. So, here is the thing, though. The story of the M14 should not be remembered in the way that you remember it when you watched that History Channel documentary all those years ago. What it should be remembered is as it was. An absolute failure from start to finish. Because after this rifle was pitted against the FAL, and after both rifles were deemed acceptable, with the M14 edging out in the no one knows department, simply because Ordnance Corps was going to make this their winner regardless, so whatever you had read or said, I don't even think it actually matters, because at the end of the day, we're a government entity, and we're gonna keep our jobs, no matter how many people die as a result. What is to be noted is that once we enter full-scale production in 1957, immediately we are running into big problems. For instance, the first set of bolts are badly heat-treated, somewhere above 50%, in fact, so bolt lugs will just tear themselves in half if you use this rifle. Sweet. Quality control is also super bad, because the accuracy standard for these rifles, by the way, is 6 minute of angle, meaning 6 inches at 100, which means your 1,000-yard rifle is a 6-minute gun. I don't even understand how people have a positive view of this thing. And by the way, the initial sets of guns were having massive problems actually hitting this accuracy standard. Why? Because you're trying to mate your iron and wood frickin' gun in an inconsistent manner together, which means, you know, the lesson that we learned forever ago about wooden stocks, i.e. don't do them, is being repeated here, which means you're having your wild shifting issues and zeros and whatnot. Because of course you are. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't real bad in just a shooting straight category. It was real bad in the shooting it at all category. Because turns out a slim form 9-pound rifle in full power cartridge and bad recoil impulse when set to 900 rounds per minute is gonna go from on target to the moon promptly. Also, it's simultaneously still a 9-pound plus rifle with a 20-shot magazine in it compared to a 7+ pound rifle with a 30-shot magazine in the Soviet example, which means not only is this rifle heavier, you're carrying less ammunition against an enemy that requires massive numbers to gain ground at anything. Because of course we are. Oh, by the way, the exact same finishing practices that were being used in World War II were applied to this rifle also. So you're getting rust in the always and everywhere department, which is wild because you'd have thought that we didn't learn anything about new finishes or new receivers or anything like that. I mean, it's not like this guy Eugene over here is a better rifle sitting in the wings, but you know, of course, hang him from the rafters because he wants a 22 caliber bullet. The quality control for the initial run of this gun, as well as a lot of follow-up issues that came with its production, was so bad that the United States Marine Corps took a step back, looked at it real hard and said, do we really want this? And do you understand how hard it is to get the Brocas permanently the Marine Corps to take a second guess at new things, to take a second look at new stuff? It's really impressive when the damn Air Force of all things, which by the way, as far as small arms judgment calls, would go 2 for 2 over the next few decades because they take one look at the M14, look to their left and be like, call that man Eugene, this sucks ass. Because turns out, as if we didn't figure this out in the 50s already, this thing is poorly optimized for modern combat, especially when that combat gets in close. So this 1,000-yard rifle that, as far as being issued to the infantryman is concerned, is never going to hit anything at 1,000, is incapable of being controlled in full auto, is heavier than its M1 Garand predecessor when loaded, because of course it is now going from the replacement to all of this extra shit to a semi-automatic rifle with a 20-shot magazine. So in other words, what the M1 Garand was supposed to be, only now all the extra shit that's backing it up isn't there now. Oh, but wait, this actually gets even worse. Look, this rifle isn't just bad because it was ass at everything that it tried to be. Now look, the whole 6-minute accuracy thing, it tightened up quite a bit by the time Vietnam rolled around, so at the very least we have a decent infantry rifle. That would have been great 2 wars ago, but now we're dealing with the jungles of Vietnam where we have advisors running around in the jungle figuring out really fast at when even shorter, browner versions of me with rice hats turned on them with Type 56s and opened up on them, they would immediately be outmatched instantly, by the way, in the volume of fire department, to the point where they would be completely ineffective if enough enemy was amassed on the other side of them. This is what we call a big problem. But besides this tartary actually gets even worse, because having already understood this issue, the Air Force had called that Eugene guy to come in and bring in his space-aged rifle to come help us out in a caliber that actually makes fucking sense for modern combat. And of course, because the Ordnance Corps is still a government entity at the time that's also simultaneously manufacturing the main infantry rifle that America uses, having designed the damn thing prior, which is a coincidence, it would also be yet another coincidence that they would hate this rifle and do everything in their power to sabotage the AR-15 from start to finish. Well, what do you mean by that, Chris? I mean, like, you clearly have some sort of vendetta against a rifle, you hating ass bitch you. Well, the thing is that when a design calls for chrome lining in certain areas and you just don't provide it, that is sort of a problem. When a design requires a certain type of powder to be used in order for the gas system to reliably function, and then you provide the exact opposite opposite intentionally to make the gun stop working, that's what we call a big fucking problem. And you know, when a design whose designer comes forward to say, hey, here's specifically how you maintain the rifle so that it keeps working day in, day out, regardless of weather or circumstance, and then you turn around and say that the rifle is self-cleaning because of its space-age nature, that's what we call a big problem, because this has predictable results. There's more than one report, I'm not the only one talking about this, of more than one complete squad of guys that is panicked and dying because their rifles don't work anymore, and the Ordnance Corps is the exact reason why. They gave us a turd that they knew was a turd in comparison to other people's stuff that I would just assume, having handled both guns before and having shot both of them more than a little bit, was inferior to the FAL to start. They just rigged their trial, went on to then do everything in its power to sabotage the AR-15 to the point where there's actual blood on their hands because they suck. And of course, it wouldn't take too terribly long for this gassery to be discovered and for the Ordnance Corps to be unseated, but it is unfortunate that they had to just let guys die in the meantime, because them keeping their job was a little more important than GI blood staying in their body, which is a little more than f***ed up to me, because this was all to prop up, frankly, a pretty ass service rifle that never deserved to see the light of day in the first place. But the thing is that even after the M16 was adopted, and even after the Ordnance Corps was taken apart as a result, the M14 gassery would still not go away, because the bad reputation that was unfairly given to the M16 would follow it around, and of course dumb motherfuckers that don't shoot guns would then go on to give the M14 the most unearned reputation in small arms history. So of course this doesn't end here. This continues with the M21. So following this debacle and the M14's prompt replacement by a solid service rifle, we suddenly had a massive stockpile of guns without a home. And of course, we would start selling them off to neighboring nations and allies to us. But that doesn't get rid of all the examples of guns that are hanging around, so of course we have to find a use for it someplace. So from 1969 to 1975, the M21 was born. Now, this is accurized, and by accurized I mean they gave it a synthetic stock so that it doesn't warp all over the place and so your zero actually holds, which immediately tightens things up, which I guess counts as accurizing it. And because there was no real established sniper schools or doctrines or really anything revolving around sniping in general, the M21 would be the official sniper rifle other than some anti-moose hunting rifle that was pulled out of someone's garage, which was officially replaced by the M24 in 1990. But of course, because these guns are all over the friggin' place and no one wants to just throw them in the friggin' trash can where they belong, the M1 would continue to infect armories from here forward, getting a further upgrade during the global war on terror, where this incredibly annoying and heavy Sage stock would be added with a brand new cool-ass title called the Enhanced Battle Rifle. And by enhanced, we mean a super shit wire stock that collapsed badly and wiggled all over the place once it started getting used a whole lot. That was heavy as shit, barely any real upgrade in optics whatsoever, with some railed stuff out front so we can mount lasers and whatnot to it, because of course it needed all of that too. And of course the ammunition did in fact get better, so accurizing it really meant, hey, we took the wood off of it and we gave it better ammo, which really didn't give it better qualities as a true sniper rifle. And then of course after the M110 came online, these things would finally begin to truly disappear. But yet, of course, right after the M110 began to get fielded in 2008, we would run into what would equate to around about 9 months of bad ammunition problems that would not run reliably in these souped up SR-25s, which of course would perpetuate the History Channel notion that these guns are reliable and accurate and are just doomsday prepper catnip with rifle scopes mounted on top of them. And truly, to this day, this thing really will not go away, because the civilian market is actually turning out rifles that won't friggin' kill you, because of course nobody's shooting back now. So now that we have civilian built rifles that are actually accurized, that don't have a million of the QC issues that they have, and definitely do not have a 6-minute accuracy standard, a lot of people have come away with this notion that this rifle is solid, when in fact it's not, because there are very, very few M14s on the planet at present that are in their original working order. So if you have an M1A or an M14 that was put together by some guy that's accurate and reliable for you, and that's great because this was probably the first time that this rifle has ever been built properly in its history, which certainly wasn't while it was serving US troops, because if that were indeed the case, the M110 would not have stood a chance. But of course, because it's simply a better rifle, there's no contest here. And that's really how this rifle should be remembered. It should be remembered as hubris incarnate. That wasn't just woefully impractical for the people that were being forced to use it, but was also pushed at the expense of the lives of the people that it was supposed to protect in the first place. And all of this came from an ordnance corps that should have fielded this rifle an entire war prior to that, when we still had Nazis to shoot at. But that's all the time I got for this pile of nonsense. I'm Chris. This is a Tism Tangent. This is Regular Guy Training. We'll see you next week. I am done with this. I have been trying to record this thing for 12 hours. This whole house just made too much noise.